Good afternoon. First off, I want to thank the NIAA for inviting me and inviting me to the Roundtable. I thoroughly enjoyed the Roundtable where you got a smaller group and there was a tremendous amount of dialogue that occurred. And you already heard that we probably, coming out of that dialogue, raised more questions than we found any answers to. And that's the reason why we're continuing to have this dialogue. And the other thing that I think you saw is kind of the advancement of thought and dialogue that has occurred from what came out of last year's potential metrics to the revisions of those metrics that Roger just presented. I mean, there has been an evolution in some of the thinking and what it might even be practical in terms of some of the use metrics. One of the things, though, that I want to point out through Cargill's presentation or why we are involved, and very similar to what Christine said, is that, there's already things happening. And I think we need to figure out, get some metrics on the table because we're already missing some comparison data that's already going on. Cargill, for example, in what we do, we've got 70 different businesses. We're in 67 countries. We have animal feed, our new animal nutrition business is in most of those 67 countries. And we're already looking at what we put in our feeds, how we adjust the antibiotic use in the various countries across the globe. And it is different. The health conditions are different. The regulations are different. But in many cases, and absolutely, the metrics are different across almost every one of these countries that we've got involved. And we've not figured out how we're going to show advancement, particularly in animal agriculture, the advancement of what we've changed, and then what the outcome of that advancement is causing, in the mix. And that's the part that I think we've got to continue to dialogue. And I know when we first went into the Roundtable in June, it was, okay, we've talked about this. How do we get a call to action? And that's one of the things I want you to think about today. Some of the things that we've done in terms of stewardship, and that's almost one of those terms that's becoming overused, but I can tell you absolutely has, every person you ask has a different definition. We're trying to tie antibiotic use into our stewardship conversation that we have, and some of the things that we've already done in terms of moving forward is we are taking a look at reducing the use of human antibiotics in food production. You don't recognize the brands out of Cargill. We are basically an ingredient supplier to many of the brands that you are familiar with. But what we have done is in our beef supply, reduced what we could control in our beef supply, which is 1.2 million cattle a year, reduced the use of the shared class antibiotic in 8 cattle feed yards, reduced it 20%. We've done work in that work, and instead of a continuous use, we took 20% of that continuous use out of our cattle. One of the other things pointed out, and I've heard them as part of the human medicine conversation, is this isn't really about behaviors. This is truly about medical doctor behaviors, it's about veterinarian behaviors, it's about producer behavior. And one of the focuses that Cargill is doing is making sure that the cattle that we're receiving come under a beef quality assurance certification. It isn't one of those tight metrics that says, hey, I'm using this much antibiotics and I've reduced it by X. But it's one of those programs that helps drive awareness within our producer community in the judicious use of antibiotics, in addition to animal welfare and many of the other production practices. So we want to get our producers in the cattle sector moved into having beef quality assurance programs, and that our cattle are under those programs when we purchase them into our program. In our animal nutrition business, if it was easy to replace antibiotics, we'd have done it already. We've, after 80 different trials, et cetera, have finally came up with a promote biacid, which is an essential oil, not approved in the U.S. yet, but had been approved outside of the U.S. as one of those replacement practices. One of the things that we are finding is, antibiotics are probably one of the most consistent treatments that we can have. the replacements are not as consistent in the varied circumstances that we have to treat our animals. And so this, if it was an easy task, we'd already have it done. But we are trying to do additional experiments, particularly in animal nutrition, to understand what are some of those replacements, what are some of those practices that help us reduce that use of antibiotics. In our turkey business, we've probably made the most dramatic changes. In our honeysuckle white and Shady Brook Farms, we've eliminated growth promoting 2 years before it was required in our processes. We've eliminated shared class antibiotic gentamicin from our turkey hatcheries. And then we will be offering Honest Turkey brand, which is featuring product from birds that have never received antibiotics. So we're doing some in that one. There also is a supply chain consideration as we look at these various species. Many of you know that we have a difference in terms of some of the vertical integration versus the independent supply chain segments. That changes how we can accomplish things and how quickly we might accomplish them. I know in the broiler industry and the turkey industry, with the vertical chains, you can affect change much more quickly than we can in our segmented cattle population. But we're making progress in those pieces. I want to sum up some of what Roger said and the others said about the presentation and the roundtable. I do think walking out of that roundtable, there is a collaboration across the stakeholders. We have a lot of stakeholders who have different ideas of what it means to have stewardship, a lot of ideas on just how impactful is animal agriculture to the human medicine condition. And I mean, you could ask the participants in the room, and we have got one on each end of the continuum of any one of the issues that we have. But what we did have was the ability to sit down and have a conversation and try and understand how we can work through this together and do it in a consistent with a One Health goal parameter, in that we do need to figure out how to keep antibiotics as a viable solution for both animal and human use for years to come. I think that is a shared goal that folks have. Probably what we don't share is exactly how we're going to get there. But we have got to figure out, I do think, and what that defined purpose is, what the goals are. Once we can nail some of those down, I think the metrics will come a little easier. A lot of our discussion was, I'm not sure we've got kind of this defined purpose. Do I just measure use when I'm not sure how it's linked to antibiotic resistance? Right? Because that's a complicated jump that you go from that animal use into the resistance in human medicine. So I think clarifying some of those goals, this is a very complex topic, numerous stakeholders. The thing that we do know in the work that we've done with our consumers is that consumers care about this issue. And you will continue to see the marketplace move, no matter what the science is, no matter what the metrics are, no matter what the regulations are. And if we ever stand a chance to understand what that movement has created or not created, we've got to get some of these metrics in play. So the dialogue that we're having here, I think, is really important. We just got to figure out how to legitimately get to some metrics that we can show what our changes have impacted.